The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast and Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories. Today, I'm going to be talking to Nicole. So, Nicole, if you can tell me when you were born, not necessarily when, if you can describe to me what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received. It's all yours.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm delighted and excited and so grateful to be on your show. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Yeah. Where did I grow up? The deep South in America, Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, to be exact. And that is the capital of the state. And Mississippi is probably the most poverty-stricken state of any of the states. So I grew up, and my dad had his own business. He made lawnmowers. Our family made Yazoo lawnmowers. So I grew up in a family business. So that meant we worked in the company since we were really, really little. He was a Marine. He went into the U.S. Air Force Academy, one of the first classes, and then graduated from that and went on into the Marine Corps and served in Cuba in the Bay of Pigs. And then he got out. So raised in a really controlling, militaristic type family. My dad was God, basically.
So was that in the missile crisis?
Yes, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's exactly right.
Over there for that kicking off. Well,
yeah,
that must have been exciting at the time.
Yeah, he flew helicopters. Well, I think it was better than going to Vietnam. I'm not going to get into that whole political thing, but anyway, and in the Deep South, as some of your previous guests that I've listened to have talked about, it's one of the fundamental cornerstones is religion. So it's known as the Bible Belt, along with the stroke belt, because they don't necessarily eat the best over there. So I grew up in terms of schools. I attended all of them. I started at a parochial school when I was little, Episcopalian, and then I went over to a Southern Baptist school. And then by the time I got to junior high, my parents decided to put us into the public school system. So I was bused across town into an all-Black African-American school that was 99% African-American, which was a complete shock to me because all the previous schools I'd been in were all white kids, So that was extremely challenging because you're the one on the outside now. You're the one that's in the minority. And there were very few other white kids to be friends with. And it was difficult to make friends with Black kids because there's still a lot of racial tension going on, and you did not want to bring a Black kid home to your white house in a white neighborhood, so that was a bit challenging. I think we raced ahead a little bit here. So should we just wind it a little bit back?
Your first school, you said it was
Episcopal. It was an Episcopal. Yeah.
So what did that entail then?
Well, we had to wear uniforms. We had to go to chapel. In first grade, I can remember that I even remember my first grade teacher, Sister. We called her Sister Simmons. The teachers all wore uniforms as well, but it was very Christian oriented. We did acted out the Christmas play according to the Bible, all of that kind of stuff. So religious.
Yeah. So then you moved on to a Baptist school. So how much difference was there between the two?
In terms of God and their view of God, the concept of God, that was different. The Baptists had definitely more rules You can't dance. That's against, there's the 10 Commandments, and then every single denomination seems to add their own rules as to whether or not you can get to heaven. So the Baptist had a lot of rules, and they also seem to have a little bit more fun. We actually went to two different churches because my dad was Southern Baptist and my mother was Lutheran. So growing up, and then you go to school in these different churches. The same piece, though, was God was a duality. God was loving. God was this figure up in the sky, this old man that we grew up with, and there was a heaven and there was a hell. But God was loving and protective, and he would be there for you and loved you very much. And then on the other side, if you did something bad, if you broke a commandment, if you broke a rule, then you were a sinner and you were bad and you were going to hell. And hell was down in the middle of the earth where there was fire, and the devil was down there, and you would be eternally separated from your family and God, and you did not want that to happen. So basically you grow up in fear. That's the underlying emotion. You're always scared you're going to do something bad enough to get kicked into hell. And that was scary as kids.
I thought the devil went down to Georgia. I didn't think he was in Mississippi.
He the devil's like Santa. He has to cover a lot of territory because the Catholics were doing that too. There was a lot of people that were counting on the devil to get a lot of people. So, it's so interesting to me now that I've had my near-death experience and my memory came back. That is not the concept of God at all that I now have. And I look at it and I just go, why did they scare us so bad? Because fear is an emotion that just keeps, it's a low vibration, but it doesn't allow you to have clarity when you make decisions, because you're making decisions from that part of your brain, the amygdala, where you're in fight, flight, or fear. And,
I got a theory on fear. And people instill fear into people to be able to control them.
That's exactly right.
Fear is all about. It's all about control.
And we got a lot of that going over here in the United States right now. Lots of fear.
I bet. So, what about your neighbourhood where you grew up? What was that like? What was your house like? I mean, you say you had a family business, so obviously you lived in a reasonably good house.
Yeah. I would say we were, looking back on it, we were upper to middle class. There were 4 kids, so we started out in a 3-bedroom home, and then we expanded the garage into our parents' bedroom. But we lived then as we got to be teenagers, we moved right up the street to a bigger house, and that was a 2-story house, and it was wood and A-framed, and we bought the vacant lot next to it. So we had a lot of room and a lot of pine straw, because there's a lot of pine trees here. And I swear all we did was rake pine straw and plant monkey grass, because we were in the lawnmower business and our lawn had to look good. So I tell you, to this day, I don't want to live near pine trees.
I can't say I blame you.
I have done my share of raking that pine straw up and putting it around beds and everything else. We lived on the same street my entire life. It's just 2 different houses. And then toward the end of my high school years, the neighborhood became integrated, and it's called white flight. So African Americans started moving in, and white people started moving further north or east into different new developing neighborhoods that were nicer homes and did not have any Black people in it.
So I guess that area in Mississippi, it's known for cotton and slavery and all the rest of it, and Huckleberry Finn, and who's the other one?
Yes, absolutely.
Tom Sawyer.
Yes, absolutely, on the Mississippi River.
So did you get any of that in your history lessons?
What we got was more of, we would read those as a side, but it was mainly, what do I want to say? Civics, I guess is what we call it, where you learn the state bird is the mockingbird, the state flower is the magnolia, and every state has a bird or an animal, a flower, a tree. I mean, there's so many different things that are specific to the state in addition to the flag and everything like that. So we did learn the history of Mississippi, but we did not learn the like what was going on with the civil rights movement. And I was born in the mid 60s. So that was going on right at that time. And when I look at it now, it is just horrific what was truly going on during that time, and how people were treating each other, especially the white people treating the black people. And it's just shocking to me today that that's even still going on. And that we can't all realize that, or we can't seem to get it on a conscious level, that everything and everyone is connected. And when I was in the military, it didn't matter what color you were or what religion you were. We all bleed red, and you go and you help your fellow man. And I don't understand it's the unconsciousness. People just are not conscious in what they're doing and what they're choosing. And the greater good of all is more important than your good individualistically.
Yeah. So moving on slightly then. So when you got into your junior high, is that when you moved across town?
Yeah, I was bused across town because we were in
On one of those big yellow ones?
Yeah, yep, it
So
did. And I that was
what was the
horrible.
reason behind that? So
Go ahead.
what was the reason behind sending you across town in the first place to a different school, and one that was in, I guess, all black school?
Yes. My mother said that we were paying taxes to go to school. So if we were paying taxes, we should go try out the schools. That was
And
her reasoning.
there wasn't a state school close to you then?
No, not junior high. There was a high school that my sister went to that she could walk to, actually. But my little brother and I, he was 1 year behind me. We had to be bused about a 30-minute bus drive, across town.
Okay. So how did you find it? I mean, being a really minority in
I
a...
found it lonely because it was difficult to make friends, and I didn't keep in touch with any of the friends that I had gone to school with at the previous two schools. We didn't interact. So it was hard to get anywhere from a popularity contest. So if you went for cheerleader or anything that was a popular vote, a white kid was not going to be chosen because it was predominantly black, and they vote for a black person. So the inequality with things like that was very obvious. I
So
I guess
did you suffer a lot of racism?
I think looking back, I did. I just didn't realize it at the time. I was I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'll just go ahead and admit that. I was trying to please my parents since the day I was born because they wanted a boy and I weighed 10.5 pounds. And Dad was sure that I should be the next linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys. And instead, I was a girl. So of course, one of my dad's love, his approval, his attention, as all kids do. So I did whatever he said. And then he had law and order at his house was, you do what I tell you and you better get it the first time. And there were no second chances. I mean, he didn't even, his number one commandment, I put it in my book, is no spending the night with other kids. So I got to do it one time with my mother's permission in the 4th grade. And I didn't even enjoy it because I knew I was going to be in trouble with my dad the next day. And I was, even though my mother said it was okay. But I didn't spend the night again until I was at the Air Force Academy and had 3 roommates. So, now when I see kids and they're just spending the night at other people's homes, since, gosh, they're 6 months old or whatever, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that just never happened, and we had to go and we had to sit with him at church with mom and dad. We couldn't sit with our friends, and we couldn't fall asleep, and there were just so many rules. And I think there was so much of church, and there were so many rules with it. You just weren't going to win, Tim. There's no way you were going to be that. God was even monitoring your thoughts. So if he's monitoring your thoughts, the heck with it. So yeah, but Brinkley was a difficult school. It really was. And I didn't, there was few white teachers. We did have a white principal, but it was just really, my brother played football, and he got teased a lot in the locker room, and picked on and actually bullied. And I just tried to keep my head down and make the two friends that I did, and get along. But I was a do-gooder, and they were smoking back then. They were smoking dope or weed on the school bus in the back of the bus. So I went and told my mom. Whoa, was that a mistake? Because she got on the bus when it picked us up and said to the group in the back, if you don't stop this, I'm going straight to the principal, and all your parents are going to know. So my brother and I were now losers, and we were regulated to sit on the front seat of the bus. And there was like 3 of us squished into one seat, and we had to sit with a girl. I'll never forget her name, Jamie. And we used the word retarded back then. Special disabilities would be it today, but we were regulated to sit with a quote retarded girl. And my brother was so mad at me for telling mom about this, because she made a scene, and nobody forgot that.
So how long were you at that school?
I was there 2 years. Then I went to the high school level, different school. There was more proportional. I would say it was more, maybe 87% Black and 13% white. So there were more white kids there. But as the years went on, it became more Black instead of white, because that area that we lived was becoming more African American. They were moving into that area.
Yeah. So how was your high school then?
Well, I switched to a prep school the middle of my junior year, and that was very difficult because I came in when these people had been going to school as a cohort since the 7th grade. So in the 7th grade, they already knew who the homecoming queen was going to be. They knew who all the cheerleaders were. They had all that formed in the 7th grade. So an outsider coming in, I had other activities outside of school. I headed up a teen board. I was a model. I did junior achievement. So I had I did Bible drill. I did a lot of things outside school. And then in school, I did like writing for the newspaper. I was co-editor, but I never dated. My dad didn't see any value in dating, so I never had a date. Never went to a prom or any of those kind of things. So I felt real lonely, in that sense, but I kept busy with the other stuff, so I wouldn't really allow myself to just think, oh, I'm missing out. But I do feel like I missed out, because then I go to a school with 4,000 guys, and I'm like, his rules were no smoking, no drinking, and no dating cadets. And I'm like, okay, Dad, you're sending me I've never had a date, and you're sending me to a school with 4,000 guys. That was not good.
So what was that school?
That was the United States Air Force Academy. That's a military academy in Colorado Springs, and you go 4 years and you graduate as a second lieutenant in our military, and then you serve 7 years in exchange for like the tuition payment and all that. So it's quite an honor to get selected. You have to go through our congressional nominations. It's a long process. It's an arduous and difficult process. And I was the 6th class of women. They had only started admitting women. The first class graduated in 80. So I was one of the newer females to get through this. And now that I look back, I don't know what my dad was thinking, because when he was there back in 1960, he went through the same thing. You all get hazed the first year. It's mentally abusive, it's physically abusive, it's emotionally abusive, and for women, it was sexually abusive. And I was mortified that I was actually putting myself through this to please my father, because I knew in my soul, Tim, I am not a fighter. In fact, in everybody's soul, we're not designed to kill other people. And that's
No.
why we have 22 veterans a day, in my opinion, that are committing suicide in the United States because of something called soul loss. When they're in the theater or when they're in battle, it traumatizes you to see someone else killed, and especially someone your own age or your own comrade.
Yeah.
It is just traumatizing. And the same thing if you have to shoot someone else. And I knew at boot camp this was not for me, but I had this thing where I could not fail, fear of failure. And I had worked so hard to get into the academy that I just couldn't quit. The shame, the humiliation, the embarrassment, I couldn't bear it. So I just kept plugging along. But I do remember the first phone call I made. They gave us, we didn't have cell phones back then, and
No.
we got a 3-minute phone call halfway through boot camp. And I heard my mother's voice on the other end. And Tim, I just started sobbing. For 3 minutes, I cried the entire phone call. And then the commander came over and said, "That's it, Kerr. Go sit
Time
over
up.
there and sit over there and get yourself together." And what I realized years later was I was having a full-on panic attack, because I heard my mother's voice, and what I needed her or my father to say was, "It's okay to quit. It's okay to come home. You're not a loser. You're not a failure. It doesn't define who you are. We don't love you any less." But I never
And I bet
got
they
that.
didn't.
No.
I saw
In
that.
fact, when my mother when my mother told me years later, she said, "I looked at your father after that call and I said, 'What have we done to her?' And he's like, 'Oh, she'll be okay.'" I was not okay. I went from there to, they called it R flight, which is remedial. And that's just where you work one-on-one with someone. And it just got harder for me. And I felt like Private Benjamin, that movie with Goldie Hawn, where I was just in the wrong place. I just was not, uh, I didn't grow up even wanting to be in the military. I did all these things that were just so opposite that.
So this Air Force Academy is the same as the sort of West Point
It's exactly the Naval
and
Academy,
and
Annapolis.
the,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. They're all sister schools.
yeah. So I mean they're like Ivy League, aren't they, to get into?
Yes, yes.
So you graduated after 2 years. So you
No,
became a lieutenant.
no. It's a 4-year process, and I graduated in a different way. I was actually killed in a car crash my sophomore year. So I started into year 2. It only was getting harder, Tim. The academics. I was taking electrical engineering. My brain doesn't even compute double E. Okay, I don't understand it. I barely got out of organic chemistry. That was like molecules looking like bats. I just don't understand that. And so here I am taking these courses, and I'm just freaked out. I'm going to fail them all. But the beginning of my sophomore year, I was involved in I had a near-death experience. And I was getting a ride back with an upperclassman from a squadron event, and he had been drinking, and the whole squadron had been drinking, actually. And I asked him for a ride back. We were in a 1965 Corvette convertible. And if you go on my website at www.nicolekerr.com and you click on You Are Deathless, there are images that are in my book, and you can actually see the car crash, because it's all in my book. But I just got it out on Audible yesterday, in fact. And so when you're listening to it in an audible format, I describe the image, but you need to see it, because it's the type of thing when you see it, all of a sudden it puts everything in perspective. And I'll show you what the car looked like if you can see that.
Wow.
I'm going the
Not
wrong
a
way.
lot
There
left of that. Doesn't even look like a Corvette.
No, and it's just unsurvivable. So, and I did make the front page of the paper, not the way I wanted to, but there it is. And for people on YouTube, I'm going the wrong way, this way. It's hard to go in the reverse. There it is, flipped over. Oh, they're all working on me.
Crikey.
So, yeah, it was. I was pronounced dead at the scene. Some bystanders heard the crash and came out and couldn't get any vitals on me. So they went in and got a blanket and covered me up and called 911. And by the time the first responders got there, was between 10 and 13 minutes. So I was technically dead for that long. And the EMT that checked me out did something called a sternal knuckle press, which is designed to elicit pain in the body. And what happened was my right eye, it flickered and my pupil dilated. So he knew that there was life in me. He was just scared he wasn't going to be able to keep me alive. And that was my soul coming back into my body. When we hear that phrase, your eyes are the window to the soul, have you heard that?
Yeah.
That truly was the truth in my case, because then he was able to get a blood pressure of 60/0 on me, which is practically dead, and got me to the nearest, got me doing CPR the whole way to the nearest community hospital. Now, if you know anything about rural communities, which I'm sure you do, living where you do, they're not really equipped to handle trauma. So, needless to say, I detail in my book all my injuries, which were massive. And 19 years later, my actual memory of the crash came back. But the only memory I had of the crash was bright white lights. That was it. And I asked my surgeon much later, I said, were those the operating room overhead lights that I saw? Did I wake up? And she goes, no, Nicole, you were unconscious the entire time and you didn't wake up till the following day. So it was something beyond whatever. It was not anything to do with the hospital, the operations, the overhead lights. So when my memory came back, then that's when I remembered going over to the other side and being told, I found out later it was my grandfather who came down and picked my soul up and took me up. When I flew out of the car, I went butt up through the windshield and I froze there, and he came and took me up, and he died at age 58. And I found this out at age 58, that this is what he did. He looked like he was in his 30s then. None of the history that I knew about him, he was an alcoholic and all that, none of that was there with him anymore. No negative. It was just this loving, kind man. And I could hear other spirits where we went. It was a space that was up, and it wasn't English. I don't know how I understood them, whether it was telepathy or whatever, but they said that we, meaning humans here on earth, need to ask the angelic realm for help, that they are not going to interfere in our lives unless we ask for help. And that's because we have free will. So they are there ready to assist us. So please call on them for help, because there is plenty of help available, and we are all assigned at least one guardian angel our whole life. So if you haven't developed a relationship with the angelic realm, with your guardian angel, it is time to awaken to that realm and realize you are not alone, and you have never been alone. And when you start realizing that, things start changing in your life because it's not all up to you. You realize you can't control most things, and there is a divine being watching out for your greater good. And then the second message I got was my grandfather told me, "You are going to go back." And I was like, "No, I do not want to go back." Because you have to remember, my energy body split, and I was in a soul space. I could look down and see my body in the ditch. I saw what I was wearing. I saw how broken I was. And I was like, there is no way I want to go back in that body and live, because A, I don't know how I'm going to be able to recover physically and what my limitations are. B, I started not believing in the concept of the God that I grew up with when I went into boot camp, because I was praying. I had this concept of a vending machine God. If you just did the right things, you'd get the reward. And that's not what I was finding out with being on my own in the military. I was praying for this not to happen, and sure enough, it happened, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, well, where is this God? Where's there any evidence of this God? He's certainly not helping me out. And Jesus, what a friend. Well, where is this friend? Where seriously, am I that bad? I've tried to be good my whole life, and so I was already starting to doubt that whole concept and pull away. And I was in the hospital, and I had 2 more code blues where I just, they called me dead on the operating table. And it was just such up and down and up and down. And what did I have to look forward to? The God that my parents believed in, I was going to have to go back into that realm and that church and those churches. And then the other thing is my parents blamed me for the wreck, saying that I didn't follow my dad's rules. I actually had a beer that day. I had a cigarette, and I was getting a ride back with an upperclassman who they thought I was dating, which wasn't true. But they blamed me for disobeying. And since I disobeyed my father, in turn, I disobeyed my Father in heaven. So I live with that blame. That hurt more than anything, is that I disappointed my dad. He'll never forgive me. And he hasn't. In fact, just this last May, my roommate who left the academy that Christmas after my accident happened in August, she quit. And none of us ever heard from her. The other 2 roommates never did. So I found her on Facebook, and I asked if we could do a Zoom chat, and she said, okay. And I'm like, where have you been for 38 years? And she said, Nicole, I'm so sorry. I caused the crash. And I said, what? No, you didn't. He was drunk. He caused it. And later, my memory was he made a sexual pass at me, and I said no, and he got really angry and sped up and turned the wheel of the car, and it fishtailed. And therefore, now I could understand when I said no to a guy, I was so scared of their anger and was having a hard time in relationships. But she told me that we had agreed that I would get a ride back with her after the event was over. And so when it was over, I went to get in the car with her, and she goes, look, I'm going to drive this senior cadet's car back for him because he's drunk, and I want to be alone with him because I really like him. So there's one other guy left, Nicole, and you can catch a ride back with him. And I said, but he's been drinking. And she goes, oh, they've all been drinking. Don't worry about it. Just go have some fun, and I'll see you back at the academy. And she never did. And she never knew he was going to go stop and have another beer, And his dad wore 3 stars and was head of the Army Corps of Engineers. And that guy made one call to the superintendent of the academy, and his son was allowed to graduate, whereas no other cadet would have been allowed that. The state of Colorado charged him with vehicular assault and other things, but he pled guilty, and I don't speak to him. And it just was really sad because she felt the guilt of, if she would have just let me go back with her like we had set up, none of this would ever have happened. And I said, well, why didn't you ever tell me? She goes, I thought you knew and were angry at me. And I said, no, I didn't remember that part of it. And so it's so important in trauma events to communicate what your perception is of something, what somebody else's perception is, and clear the air, because I wish this would have been known, when she was visiting me in the hospital. And when I told my dad what she said, he said, well, you should have walked home back to the academy. I said, are you kidding me? I just wanted to say F you to him, and I haven't talked to him since, and I'm not going to, because it's like, uh, it's like really 25 miles I'm supposed to walk back to the Air Force Academy at night, no phones. A bear would have probably eaten me, So anyway, it's been a real sad journey in terms of that, but it's healing as well. 38 years, at least I'm still alive, and we are able to repair the relationship and understand it. But she's been haunted by it ever since. And she just said, I couldn't go on and complete it without you there and knowing what I did.
So what happened after the accident? Once you're obviously in hospital, you recovered, you're still here. So did you carry on the course eventually, or was that the pin came out?
No, the pin came out. I'm now a disabled veteran of the United States Armed Forces, and I just got compensation. I guess it was last year, 2 years ago, they raised my compensation to 100% disability, which I had been trying for years, but it's a very arduous process to get documentation for certain things that today they know about PTSD, today they know about TBIs, but back in '83, they didn't know about any of that. So, and I think, the PTSD part of it was misdiagnosed. They only diagnosed that with me 2 years ago. And I had been on 41 different drugs for anxiety, for depression, for all these kind of things that had been, they had the wrong diagnosis, and they didn't have the right dosing of medications. And then I tried on my own without medication for so long, doing all these alternative healing methods. And so you name it, I have tried it. That's why in my book, part of my initials, I developed an eating disorder because I didn't get any mental health help. My parents said, when the doctor said Nicole needs mental health, she needs a psychiatrist and a psychologist for what she's been through. And my mother looked straight at the doctor and said, Jesus and God are our psychiatrist and psychologist, and we'll be just fine. And I, once again, was anything but fine, because as soon as I left my mother and went to live with my sister, she's 15 months older than me, she was living the life in Dallas. She just graduated from college and dating and having fun and all that. And here I was, this, really wounded sister roommate coming in to live with her, who had all this trauma that, she didn't know what to do with. And I started compulsive eating, as it was known back then. And it's now known as binge eating disorder. But I hated myself. I hated the way I looked. I had so many scars. I just, and I hated myself that I could make such a stupid decision to get in a car that someone was drinking, and now I know later, I can forgive myself based on my conversation with Margaret, but that was a hard one, because my parents to this day still haven't forgiven me, and they don't believe in the concept of God that I now believe in, because God is love, period. God is, there's nowhere God is not. God is not blaming anyone. God is not judging. God is not punitive. None of those. Those are all man-made constraints that, like you said, keep us in fear, which keep us controlled. But the freedom in knowing that there's nowhere God is not, and that God is love, and the whole angelic realm is there to support us. We're never alone. All of these things have brought so much peace to me, but it's taken me a long time to get that vending machine concept out of my system, because it was imprinted at such a young age.
So you've had sort of 38 years of basically trying to recover from
Yeah,
a
I
car
feel
accident.
like it'll be 40 years this year. I feel like the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. It's kind of like trying to find myself. My whole adulthood has been trying to manage and recover and deal with the suffering and the pain that this has caused. And I've had to look at it on the physical level. I've had to look at it on the mental. I've had to look at it through emotions and realizing how much I stuffed my emotions and how much most of us stuff our emotions. In the South, we're taught, don't get angry at your parents, don't hurt your mother, don't speak your truth. All of these messages of push it down, push it down, push it down, and be a good girl. Don't cause any conflict. I think a lot of us struggle with that as being either a people
Yeah.
pleaser or a perfectionist, is you do not want to cause conflict. And of course, my wreck caused a lot of conflict in my family. And it's just was, for me, it got me out of the academy. But what a way to get out. I just
Yeah.
have been
You
in a
might have
lot
done
of,
better sticking at it and
yeah.
graduating. You might have had a
So
slightly better time of it.
yeah, it's been a hard journey in so many respects, but I finally found the man of my dreams at 40, and I've gotten married, and now we have two little doggies that we adopted, and I'm able to enjoy life because I've
Mm.
let go of trying to please others. I've come into myself and aligned my body, my mind, my soul, and my spirit. I've dealt with the soul fragmentation that happened when my body, when my soul lifted out, and then when it came back in, it was fragmented, And
Mm.
so those pieces of soul loss they're a critical part of healing, and most people don't realize that because it's on the spiritual domain. But when your
Mm.
body goes through something like that, your soul will fragment in order to self-protect. And the symptoms of that is you don't want to be here,
Mm.
and I knew I didn't want to be here, and I've struggled to figure out I'm a different person. I had a
Mm.
spiritually transformative experience, and I don't believe the same that I used to believe. And
Mm.
and that is difficult because my family is still in that old bubble, an old model. And so I've had to let go of my relationships with them as I know them, and
Mm.
just I get along with my siblings, but I see Jesus in a whole different way than they do. I
Mm.
don't believe God is within us. The spark of God is within us. We don't need to go through anything or anyone to get to God. We are God.
Mm.
We are his essence. And
So, so can you explain to us a little bit about your physical injuries? How are you physically disabled now? Do you have to get around in a
yes,
wheelchair? Or
no, thank God I don't have to go around in a wheelchair, but I did for a while because they didn't know if I'd be able to walk. So
mm.
I amputated my left foot. It was hanging on just by a shred of skin. And so they had to shave some skin off my thigh, and they grafted that together. Only a 5% chance that the graft would take because it was on directly adhered to the tendon. And it took. So I have circulation problems because there's nothing there. It's granulated and directly adhered to the tendon, so no blood flows through it. It
Mm.
flows through the back of my heel. And then since I had my foot on the dashboard, that's what I remembered coming out of Starbucks when my memory came back going to work. I had one foot on the dashboard, the other leg was crossing over. Never sit like that in a car, please. That is the worst
No.
position in terms of getting hurt, is putting your feet on the dashboard or flinging them out the window. So I went butt up through the windshield, and I sliced the insides of my thighs. I had a 4th-degree laceration between my angle and sphincter, and I had cut part of the perineal nerve, which goes all the way down your leg. And I tell you, out of all the things that I experienced, nerve damage is the worst in terms of pain. I broke my pelvis on both sides. I severed my right wrist. They had to pin that together. I had a really bad road burn from skidding on the gravel pavement, so they had to shave off a couple of layers of skin on my face. I was in the hospital 4 months, 7 weeks in ICU, 2 code blues, 64 pints of blood. And this was at a time, Tim, when they were not testing for AIDS in America in blood supplies in 1983. And so I was told when I went home, you may want to get a blood test, because it was just coming out that the blood test could be contaminated. And so I had the blood test done, and I just, oh my gosh, I was so scared it was going to come back positive, but it didn't. It came back negative. And I remember a congressman's daughter was in a crash, and she got 1 pint of blood infused, and it was contaminated, and she died. So I know I'm here for a reason. And I know this, I talk about the 10 common lessons of near-death experiencers. And the first one is, we don't die. Our soul lives on. It has a long trajectory. And I want people to truly not fear death. That's what I was told, is to tell people not to fear death. And I would say, most of the books written about death are all doom and gloom and negative and despairing. And that's not the experience myself or hundreds of thousands of other people who've had near-death experiences experience. It's absolute love, light, and this just unconditional loving kindness. You just don't want to leave it, because there's no conditions, there's no negativity, there's no hurt, there's no pain, there's none of that. It all just disappears. You're not judged at all. And what a blessing that is. I think we are so hard on ourselves. Most of us, we judge our thoughts, we judge our emotions, we judge our choices. If we could just quit judging ourselves, that would be a huge thing we can do to help our mental and physical well-being.
So bring us up to date. Where are you nowadays?
I am sitting in a home we bought 2 years ago. It was built in 1850, and in New Bern, North Carolina, which is close to that. It's the coastal part of North Carolina. It did not get burned down in the Civil War, but it's been updated. But I love living in an older home that has new modern amenities. And I've now been married 18 years, and I could not have done this without my husband. He is very supportive and just really gets me. He understands when I have my physical challenges, and I've dealt with migraines for 30 years. And for people that suffer with migraines, you can't do anything. It's not like other illnesses where you can sit and watch TV or read or whatever. You got to go lay down and be quiet. And there's just nothing you can do except take your meds and just pray that it just leaves you. And, I love this little town. It's a very walkable community. I love being back on the mainland. We were in Hawaii, which is where Paul and I met and married for 17 years. And during COVID, we moved here, and I was able to finish my book and release it. And I just released my Audible version yesterday, and it's the #1 bestseller in the NDE category. So I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that people can learn that there are the positive pieces of death and reframe death to be more positive and not be so scary. Because when we fear death or we're resistant, it makes the process so much more harder. And you're not going to truly live if you're fearing death. So, and I know that's hard for people to believe that haven't been there, but it is, take it from me, you don't have to go there to know that death is beautiful. There's so many people that have written about this, and we all come up with basically the same conclusions. And love is truly, in the end, all that matters and is the source of all that exists. And if you think about that, the source, meaning God, is love. And we don't need to twist that. It's very simple,
I think what we do is we celebrate a life rather than mourn a loss, and I think
That's
that's
exactly
important.
right. Yeah,
So
I
where can
think they
people get your book from, Nicole?
Well, my book is on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's at independent bookstores, but I think over in England it would be Amazon. And you can go to my website and learn more about me. There's actually the images I just posted from the book, so you can see the crash for yourself. I'm going to post your podcast on my website, but I'm also on Facebook, Nicole.A.Kerr. And I have a blog that comes out every month or so when I feel like it. And I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, and that's about all the social media that I can keep up with. This is my vocation now. It's my calling. It's not an occupation. And I love it. I love talking about it. And if you do a book club with my book, I will, depending on time zones, I will pop in on a Zoom and talk to you from my perspective, if I can help you with any questions or discussions or whatever. So I offer that as well. But
Brilliant.
My message really is to start becoming more aware of your concept of what you believe God really is, and to align with that and to really believe it. And every one of us is going to have a different experience. But I can tell you right now, from my experience, God is love, and God is everywhere, and it is energy. And we're all energy, if you think about it. And at the end of the day, that's what I go to sleep knowing that, that's what we leave with the breath, right? It's not the body.
Terrific. Well, Nicole, that has been most enjoyable, most enlightening as well. And just thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, well, it's been my pleasure. And I do hope it helps people and comfort them. And if they're going, through or helping someone who is transitioning, now we're still human, we're going to have those feelings of grief and suffering and all of that. But to remember the cosmic context, the bigger picture of the benevolence and who we truly are, and that we really just go home, and you will see your loved ones on the other side, including your pets. So you do not need to fear that. They're just in a different form. And I think that's what's hard for people to get their head around, is you're not going to have this physical form with the face and all of this kind of stuff. But you do recognize them. You really do.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. Take care, everyone. Aloha.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.